The night Clara Whitmore was put up for sale, no alpha in the royal hall wanted to buy the Barren Omega, until the King Alpha walked in and paid with something no woman had ever been worth before, a crown. The royal mating auction was held beneath chandeliers made of moonstone and silver, in a hall so beautiful it made humiliation feel ceremonial. Clara stood at the end of the raised platform with her hands folded in front of her, the old silver bracelet locked around her wrist, its metal cold against her skin. Around her stood other Omegas in pale gowns, some widowed, some rejected, some too poor to refuse the law that called this tradition instead of cruelty. But they still had value in the eyes of the bidding alphas. Bloodlines, strong wolves, healthy wombs, possible heirs. Clara had none of those, or at least that was what the world had decided for her. The auctioneer lifted a card and cleared his throat as if her shame were just another item on the evening schedule. Clara Whitmore, age 24, Omega of Ashford Pack, returned by her former mate after 3 years of failed conception. Certified barren. The word struck her lower than her heart. Deep in the part of herself she had learned not to think about in public. Barren. The hall did not gasp. That would have been kinder. Instead, the nobles shifted, bored and faintly uncomfortable, as though someone had brought a broken chair into a room full of thrones. Clara kept her chin level. She had practiced this. She had practiced breathing through healer reports, through pitying looks, through Ethan Caldwell's careful disappointment when each month ended in silence. She had practiced until dignity became a dress she could wear even when her body wanted to fold in on itself. Ethan stood near the front row in a dark gray alpha coat, handsome as ever, clean as ever, his expression arranged into regret for the crowd. Beside him, Madeline Voss watched with pearl earrings shining against her pale throat, her smile soft enough to pass for sympathy and sharp enough to cut. The auctioneer began the bidding at 50 silver marks. No one raised a hand. He lowered it to 20, then 10. Someone in the back laughed. Under his breath, Clara felt the sound crawl over her skin. Her fingers tightened around nothing. Do not cry. Do not beg. Do not let them see the last piece of you break. 5 silver marks, the auctioneer said, his voice thinning with embarrassment. Still no one moved. Ethan looked away, and somehow that hurt more than if he had smiled. The old bracelet on Clara's wrist warmed suddenly, a strange pulse beneath the metal. She flinched and covered it with her other hand, but no one noticed. No one was looking closely enough to see anything sacred hidden inside something they had already named useless. The auctioneer sighed. No bids for the Barren Omega? The words floated over the hall, and Clara lowered her eyes because hope had become too expensive to lift. Then the great doors opened. Cold air swept through the royal hall, carrying the scent of winter pine, black leather, and storm clouds over the mountains. Every whisper died. Every alpha lowered his gaze before he seemed to understand why. Clara did not look up until the footsteps reached the center aisle, slow and absolute, each one changing the room around it. Alpha King Adrian Blackthorne had never attended a mating auction in his life. Kings did not need to bid. Kings were offered women by kingdoms. Yet he walked past Madeline Voss without a glance, past the noble Omegas with perfect bloodlines, past Ethan Caldwell, who went rigid as stone. Adrian stopped in front of Clara. She stared at the polished black floor, afraid to breathe. "Look at me," he said, not as a command, but as if the room had stolen her name and he intended to give it back. Slowly, Clara lifted her eyes. The King Alpha was taller than any man in the hall, white-skinned, broad-shouldered, with pale blonde hair and silver-gray eyes that looked cold enough to freeze lies where they stood. His gaze dropped to the bracelet on her wrist. The metal heated again. His wolf surfaced behind his eyes. The auctioneer stammered, "Your Majesty, this Omega has been certified barren. She cannot provide an heir." Ethan added, "Too quickly. She is not worth your attention." Adrian did not look away from Clara. "Then none of you understand value." "Hey." Servant hurried forward carrying a velvet case. Adrian opened it, removed the smaller crown of the northern throne, and placed it on the auction table. The hall went breathless. A crown was not money. It was territory, allegiance, history. It was enough to buy a pack and ruin a council. Clara's heart beat so hard she could feel it in her throat. Adrian touched the air above her bracelet without laying a hand on her skin, and his expression darkened as if he had just heard a locked door whisper from the other side. One word passed through his teeth, too low for anyone but Clara to hear. Seal. For one impossible moment, no one moved. The crown rested on the auction table beneath the moonstone chandeliers, its silver points catching the light like frozen fire, and every person in the royal hall seemed to understand that something ancient had just been broken. Clara Whitmore could hear her own heartbeat louder than the stunned whispers around her. Not because she thought she had been saved. Saved was a word for girls in stories, girls with soft hands and clean histories, girls who were rescued because someone had always known they were worth rescuing. Clara had just watched the most powerful alpha in the kingdom place a royal crown as payment for her body, her name, and whatever remained of her future. Her throat tightened until breathing felt like swallowing glass. The auctioneer stared at the crown as if it might vanish if he blinked. "Your Majesty," he said, voice cracking around the title, "this is far beyond the required bid." Adrian Blackthorne did not look at him. His eyes remained on Clara's wrist, where the old silver bracelet had grown so warm it felt alive. "Complete the sale." The words were quiet, but they struck the hall with more force than a shout. Ethan Caldwell stepped forward before the auctioneer could answer, color rising in his handsome face. "There has been a misunderstanding." Clara's stomach dropped. Of course he would speak now. Not when the room laughed at her. Not when her name was dragged through healer reports and shame. Only now, when a crown had made her expensive. Adrian finally turned his head, and the air changed. Ethan stopped. Mid-step, his confidence catching at the edge of the King Alpha's attention. "Explain it," Adrian said. Ethan swallowed, then arranged his features into something respectful. "Clara was entered into the auction through Ashford Pack. I only meant to settle matters honorably. She has suffered enough disappointment. Surely your Majesty does not wish to burden the royal line with a failed Omega." The word failed landed softly, dressed in concern, but Clara felt it strike exactly where he aimed it. 3 years of marriage returned in pieces. Ethan standing outside the healer's room, refusing to meet her eyes. Ethan telling her not to take it personally when his mother suggested another wife. Ethan signing the auction papers with the same hand that had once promised patience. Clara lowered her gaze before the memories could find her face. Adrian saw the movement. His expression did not soften. It sharpened. "You placed her before a crowd, announced the most private wound of her life, and called it honor." Ethan's mouth opened, but no sound came. Madeline Voss glided forward then, smooth as white silk, her expression carefully troubled. "Your Majesty, Lord Caldwell only means that royal decisions have consequences. A crown is not a coin. To pay it for any Omega would be shocking, but for one whose condition is publicly certified." She let the sentence trail off, elegant and poisonous. Clara felt every eye return to her stomach, as if the absence inside her could be inspected through fabric. Heat rose to her cheeks. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to scream. She wanted, most of all, to stop feeling like the whole world had been given permission to discuss whether her body had failed badly enough to make her worthless. Adrian stepped down from the aisle and approached the platform. The auction guards instinctively moved aside. He stopped one step below Clara, so she remained physically above him, a small detail that made the room murmur because kings did not place themselves lower than purchased women. His voice, when he spoke, was meant for her alone. Clara Whitmore. Her name in his mouth sounded unfamiliar, not like a label on a bidding card, but like something whole. She forced herself to meet his eyes. "I have paid the auction's price to remove you from this hall. I have not bought the right to command your thoughts, your body, or your obedience." The words did not fit any shape she understood. Clara stared at him, waiting for the hidden hook, the condition, the cruel turn. Men with power did not give without taking more. "Then why?" she whispered. The bracelet pulsed again, and this time Adrian's jaw tightened as though he felt it too. "Because whatever they locked around your wrist is lying." A shiver moved through her. The old silver cuff had been with her since before she could remember. Her mother had called it protection before she died. Ethan had called it an ugly little keepsake. Healers had ignored it. Clara had hated it only because it would not open, no matter how often she tried. Adrian lifted his hand toward it, stopping inches from her skin. "May I look?" The question was almost worse than an order. Clara did not know what to do with permission. Her fingers trembled as she held out her wrist. Adrian did not touch her. He only studied the inner curve of the bracelet, where tiny marks lay hidden against her pulse. His silver-gray eyes flashed, and something powerful moved through the room, not anger exactly, but recognition held on a leash. "This is not a widow's band," he said. The auctioneer went pale. Madeline's smile faded by a fraction. Ethan's scent shifted, sharp with sudden fear. Clara heard it, smelled it, felt it, though she had never been skilled with wolf senses before. Adrian looked over his shoulder at the royal guards. "Bring my carriage." Miss Whitmore leaves under royal protection. Ethan found his voice again. "She is still registered under Ashford paperwork until the transfer is sealed." Adrian turned fully toward him. "Then consider the transfer witnessed by the crown." "Your Majesty, the council will object," Madeline said. This time Adrian looked directly at her, and the polished certainty left her face. "Let them." The auctioneer struck the silver hammer with shaking hands. Once, twice. The sound echoed through the hall like a verdict. "Sold," though no one dared say the word aloud. Clara flinched anyway. Adrian noticed that too. He removed his black cloak and placed it around her shoulders, careful, formal, covering the auction gown that had made her feel exposed under every stare. The fabric was warm from his body and carried the scent of snow, cedar, and storm. Clara gripped the edges because her legs suddenly felt unreliable. As Adrian helped her down from the platform with only the lightest support at her elbow, the crowd parted in silence. She passed Ethan without looking at him. She passed Madeline and felt the other woman's gaze like a pin against her back. At the edge of the hall, Clara looked once at the crown left on the auction table. It gleamed there, impossible and accusing. "You should not have paid that for me," she said, barely above a whisper. Adrian paused beside the open doors, moonlight silvering his pale hair. "I did not pay it for you." Her chest tightened before she could stop it. Of course, there was always another reason. Then he continued, voice low and cold enough to quiet the men still listening behind them. "I paid it to shame every person in that room who believed they were allowed to put a price on you." Clara looked up at him, and for the first time that night, the hollow place inside her did not feel empty. It felt like a door waiting for a key. Behind them, on the auction table, the crown trembled once, and the bracelet on Clara's wrist answered with a pulse of silver light. The royal carriage did not take Clara Whitmore to a bedroom, a contract room, or a healer's examination chamber. It took her through the black iron gates of the northern palace just before dawn, past snow-dusted gardens and stone wolves carved along the walls, to a quiet eastern wing where no one raised a voice. That frightened her more than the auction had. At least humiliation made sense. It had rules she understood. You stood still, kept your face empty, and let people decide what they thought your body could or could not do. Kindness was harder. Kindness had edges she could not see. Clara sat very straight in the carriage, wrapped in Adrian Blackthorn's cloak, her old silver bracelet hidden beneath the dark fabric. Across from her, the King Alpha watched the palace lights approach through the frosted glass, his expression unreadable. He had not touched her again after helping her down from the auction platform. He had not asked why Ethan had sold her, why the crowd had laughed, or whether the word Barren still echoed inside her like a bell struck too hard. Somehow, his silence did not feel empty. It felt careful. When the carriage stopped, servants lined the steps in gray and silver uniforms. Clara braced herself for curiosity, pity, judgment, but every servant bowed as Adrian stepped down. Then they bowed to her. Clara's fingers tightened around the cloak. "They do not have to do that," she whispered. Adrian offered his hand, palm up, waiting rather than reaching. "They do if they work in my house. I am not a guest they should honor." His silver-gray eyes settled on her face. "You are not merchandise they should inspect either, yet many people manage that tonight." Heat rose behind her eyes so quickly she had to look away. She placed her hand lightly in his, expecting the sharp pull of ownership, the cold certainty of a man claiming what he had paid for. Instead, he helped her down and released her the moment she was steady. The palace smelled of cedar, winter air, and banked fires. Clara followed him through long halls where moonlight lay in pale strips across black marble. She kept waiting for him to turn into a different kind of man now that there were no witnesses, but he only led her to a suite with white walls, a fireplace, a locked balcony, and a bed made with soft blue blankets. A woman in her 40s waited inside, wearing a healer's coat over a dark green dress, her brown hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. She had kind eyes, but Clara no longer trusted kind eyes quickly. "This is Dr. Elaine Mercer," Adrian said. "She will look at the bracelet only if you allow it. She will not examine anything else without your permission. No one will enter this room unless you say yes, unless there is immediate danger." Clara stared at him. "You bought me at auction and are asking permission for a healer to look at my wrist?" Something moved across his face, almost anger, but not at her. "The crown bought your exit from a room that should not exist. It did not buy you." The words slipped past every defense she had built because they were too specific to be pretty. He was not saying she was precious. He was saying the transaction had been aimed at the cage, not the woman inside it. Clara wanted to believe him so badly that suspicion rose to protect her. "Then what do you want?" Adrian was silent for a moment. Outside, snow tapped softly against the glass. "The truth." He looked at the bracelet. "And I suspect the truth has been locked around your wrist for a long time." Elaine stepped closer, slow enough not to startle her. "May I see it?" Clara pushed back the sleeve of the cloak. The silver bracelet looked dull again, almost harmless. It was a narrow cuff with no hinge, no visible clasp, and tiny marks on the inner curve that she had never been able to read. Elaine reached for a small magnifying lens, then stopped. "May I touch the metal?" Clara nodded, though her throat had gone dry. Elaine's fingers brushed the bracelet. The cuff flashed once with pale light. The healer drew back sharply, face draining of color. Adrian moved half a step, not toward Clara, but between Clara and whatever fear had crossed Elaine's face. "Say it," he ordered quietly. Elaine swallowed. "This is not an infertility charm. It is not a widow's cuff. It is a womb seal." The room tilted. Clara gripped the arm of the nearest chair. What?" Elaine looked at her with such sorrow that Clara wished she had chosen cruelty instead. "A blood magic lock. Rare. Illegal now. It can suppress reproductive power, scent markers, Luna traits, sometimes even a wolf's natural healing cycle. Whoever placed this on you wanted the world to believe you were barren." Clara could not move. For 3 years, she had carried Ethan's disappointment like a stone in her chest. For 3 years, she had apologized to healers, to his mother, to empty rooms, to a body she thought had betrayed her. Her knees weakened, and the floor seemed too far away. Adrian's voice reached her through the roaring in her ears. "Clara." She hated that her name sounded safe when he said it. She hated that. She needed it too. "No," she whispered. "No, that cannot be right. I saw healers. Ethan brought the best healers in Ashford." Elaine's mouth tightened. "Then they were either incompetent, bribed, or instructed not to see." Clara flinched. Instructed not to see. The phrase opened memories she had not known belonged together. Ethan standing too close when healers spoke. His mother collecting the reports before Clara could read them. Lord Harlan visiting Ashford the week before Ethan stopped sharing her room and started calling her condition unfortunate in public. She pressed her free hand to her stomach, not because she suddenly believed herself whole, but because she did not know how to hold the possibility that she had never been broken. Adrian's wolf stirred behind his eyes, a controlled silver flash. "Can it be removed?" Elaine looked at the bracelet again, then at the inner marks. "Not by force. It was written with a condition." She turned Clara's wrist gently, revealing a line of script so fine it looked like scratches. Elaine read it aloud, voice barely above a whisper. "Closed until the true crown kneels." The fireplace snapped, loud in the silence. Clara looked at Adrian before she could stop herself. He stood utterly still, the King Alpha who had placed a crown on an auction table, the man every wolf in the kingdom feared, the one person in the room the words might mean. His expression did not change, but something in his eyes did, a recognition shadowed by dread. Clara pulled her wrist back, clutching it to her chest. "No, I am not doing this. I will not become some royal puzzle for everyone to solve." Adrian's gaze softened, not with pity, but with restraint. "Then we stop." Elaine blinked. "Your Majesty, the seal could explain the auction, the council interest, possibly even the Ashford reports." "I said we stop." Clara stared at him. "Just like that. Just like that." He stepped toward the door, then paused. "This room is yours tonight. The guards outside answer to your safety, not your obedience. Food will be sent. Elaine will stay nearby if you ask for her. Tomorrow, if you want answers, I will help you get them. If you do not, no one touches that bracelet. He left before she could decide whether to thank him or distrust him more. The door closed softly behind him. For a long moment, Clara stood in the center of a room too beautiful for a woman who had been sold hours ago, with a healer watching her as though she were both patient and miracle. Slowly, the bracelet warmed again. Clara looked down. The hidden script glowed faintly, and beneath it, another line appeared for the first time in her life. Not property, not Barren, preserved. By noon, the palace had stopped pretending Clara Whitmore was only a guest. She felt the change in the hallway outside her suite, in the heavier footsteps of the guards, in the sudden hush of servants who had clearly been told not to gossip and therefore could think of nothing else. The bracelet remained warm against her wrist, its new word hidden beneath her sleeve like a secret breathing against her pulse. Preserved. Clara had spent the morning staring at it, trying to decide whether the word comforted or terrified her. Preserved meant protected. Preserved also meant stored away for someone else's future use. She had been called Barren for so long that part of her had built a life around that wound. Now strangers were suggesting the wound had been placed there deliberately, and she did not know whether to grieve the years stolen from her or fear the reason someone had needed them stolen at all. Dr. Elaine Mercer had left breakfast untouched on the table and waited nearby with the patience of a woman who understood that silence was sometimes the only mercy left. Adrian had not returned. Clara told herself she was grateful. If the King Alpha came back, she might ask him why he looked shaken by the words on the bracelet, and she was not ready for any answer that involved crowns kneeling. Just after the palace clock struck 12, the doors at the far end of the corridor opened, and voices carried through stone. Clara knew Ethan Caldwell's voice before the words became clear. Her body remembered him faster than her mind did, stomach tightening, shoulders drawing inward, breath catching in the old pattern of a wife preparing to be gently disappointed in public. This is unnecessary, Ethan was saying, polished irritation beneath courtly restraint. Clara is still connected to Ashford Pack until the auction transfer is filed through council registry. Another voice followed, smooth and female. Madeline Voss. And if the reports about the bracelet are true, then His Majesty has placed a potentially cursed Omega in the royal wing without review. Elaine's expression hardened. Stay here. Clara almost laughed. Stay here had been the shape of her life. Stay in the room while others decided. Stay quiet while men explained her body. Stay grateful when being discarded was called mercy. She stood instead. Her knees trembled, but she stood. By the time she reached the corridor, Adrian was already there, positioned between her door and the visitors with the kind of stillness that made violence unnecessary. He wore black, as he had the night before, but no crown. Somehow that made him look more dangerous, not less. Ethan stood several feet away with two Ashford elders behind him, his handsome face set in wounded dignity. Madeline stood beside Lord Victor Harlan, the royal counselor whose silver hair and velvet coat made him look like Law had learned to walk. Clara's throat dried at the sight of him. She remembered him now, a guest at Ashford during her second year of marriage, his cold fingers resting on her wrist as he admired the bracelet and told Ethan that old things should remain where they belonged. Adrian did not turn when Clara appeared, but his shoulders shifted by a fraction, as if every instinct in him had registered her. Miss Whitmore is not available for pack discussion, he said. Harlan smiled thinly. Your Majesty, every person taken from a royal mating auction remains subject to registry review. You know this. Until the transfer is certified, Ashford retains legal interest. Legal interest. Clara felt the words crawl under her skin. Adrian's voice dropped. She is a woman, not a parcel delayed in transit. A woman whose condition may affect royal succession. Madeline's gaze slid to Clara, beautiful and sharp. If she is barren, then the crown has paid a political fortune for nothing. If she is not barren, then someone hid a dangerous magical condition from the court. Either way, this is not a private matter. Ethan looked at Clara then, and for a moment his face softened in a way that might have broken her yesterday. Clara, I only came because I am worried. You do not understand royal politics. These people will use you. The sentence struck almost gently, and that made it worse. He had always known how to wrap control and concern. Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man she had loved, but the man who had watched her stand on an auction platform while strangers refused to bid. "You sold me to them," she said. Color rose along Ethan's neck. "I entered you into a lawful process after our marriage failed." "Our marriage did not fail," she said quietly. "You surrendered it to a report you never let me read." The corridor went still. Madeline's eyes narrowed. Harlan's smile did not move, but his attention sharpened. Adrian finally looked over his shoulder at Clara. He did not warn her to stop. He did not rescue her from speaking. He simply gave her the space to finish. Clara held Ethan's gaze even as her hands shook beneath her sleeves. "Did you know?" she asked. "About the bracelet." Ethan opened his mouth too quickly. "Of course not." The bracelet warmed. Not painfully, not visibly, but with a pulse so clear Clara felt it like a second heartbeat. Adrian's eyes flicked to her wrist. Harlan saw the movement. "This is precisely why council review is required," he said. "Old seals respond unpredictably. Until we know what she is, she must be classified." Clara's fear went cold. Classified as what? Harlan's expression softened into something almost paternal. "That depends on the results. If the seal confirms permanent barrenness, Ashford may petition to annul all remaining obligations and place you in protected service. If the seal suppresses royal fertility magic, then your person becomes a matter of throne security." The world seemed to narrow to the length of the corridor. Useless or useful, discarded or owned, barren reject or royal asset. Clara heard her own breathing turn shallow. Adrian's aura rolled outward, not a roar, not a threat, but a pressure that made the candles along the wall bend toward him. "Choose your next words with care, Harlan." The counselor bowed his head just enough to avoid open insult. "I choose the law. The court must convene. A fertility trial will determine whether Miss Whitmore is harmless, cursed, or crown-bound." Elaine stepped forward, furious. "That trial has not been used in decades because it treats Omega women as evidence instead of people. Tradition does not expire because it becomes unfashionable," Harlan replied. Madeline looked at Clara with false sympathy. "Surely, if there is nothing to hide, a simple trial will clear your name." Clara almost said she had no name left to clear. They had taken wife, taken wanted, taken worth, taken even the right to know whether her body had belonged to her. But Adrian spoke first. "No trial happens without her consent." Harlan's eyebrows lifted. "Refusal will be interpreted by the council." "Let them interpret," Adrian said. "They do it badly, but often." A few servants at the far end of the hall forgot to breathe. Clara should have felt relieved. Instead, Adrian's defense opened another fear. If she refused, they would call her cursed. If she agreed, they would measure the most wounded part of her in front of strangers. She looked at the King Alpha, at the man who had paid a crown not to own her, but to remove her from a room that sold people. "What happens if they prove I am worth something?" she asked. The question silenced everyone more completely than Adrian's power had. Ethan looked away. Madeline's lips parted, then closed. Harlan's face revealed nothing, which was answer enough. Adrian turned fully toward Clara. For the first time, the cold king looked almost undone. "Then I make sure no one mistakes worth for ownership." Clara wanted to believe that promise. She also knew promises were easiest before the world demanded a price. Her bracelet pulsed again, and beneath the silver cuff, the hidden word preserved burned warm against her skin. Clara lifted her chin, though her voice came out softer than she intended. "I will stand before the court," she said. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Clara." She met his eyes. "But not because they own my answer. Because I want mine." Harlan smiled as if he had won. Madeline smiled as if Clara had already lost. Ethan looked almost frightened. Adrian did not smile at all. He only stepped aside, not to abandon her, but to show the court gathering behind Harlan that the choice had been hers. And as Clara walked past the men who had come to classify her, the bracelet on her wrist flashed once beneath her sleeve, bright enough for every wolf in the corridor to see. That evening, before the fertility trial could turn Clara Whitmore into another public question, Adrian Blackthorne took her somewhere the council could not follow without invitation. The Moon Conservatory sat behind the oldest wing of the palace, enclosed by arched glass and iron vines, warm despite the snow gathering outside. Moonflowers climbed the walls in pale clusters, their petals closed tight under the dimming sky. Silver-leaf trees grew from black soil and stone planters, and a narrow pool ran through the center of the room, reflecting the first faint stars. Clara stopped just inside the doorway, suddenly aware of the auction gown she still wore beneath Adrian's cloak, the old bracelet at her wrist, the word preserved hidden against her skin. Everything in this place looked cared for, chosen, allowed to bloom. She felt like a broken thing accidentally carried into a shrine. Adrian closed the door behind them and remained several feet away, giving her space even in silence. Luna queens used to come here before coronations, he said. Before trials. Before births. Before war councils. It was the one room where no one was supposed to ask them for anything. Clara looked at the closed flowers. Does that rule still exist? It should. His answer came too quickly, edged with something like regret. She walked deeper into the conservatory, her shoes quiet against the stone path. Along the far wall stood statues of former queens, each carved in white marble, each with a moon symbol at her throat or wrist. Clara slowed before the last statue. The woman wore a silver cuff nearly identical to Clara's bracelet. Her heart stumbled. Who was she? Adrian's gaze followed hers. Queen Seraphina. The records say she never had children. The records also say she ended a succession crisis without raising an army. Clara gave a small, humorless breath. So the records call women barren when they do things men cannot explain. A flicker of something crossed his face. Not amusement. Respect. Often, the words settled between them more gently than comfort. Clara stepped closer to the statue. The carved queen's expression was serene, one hand resting over her stomach, the other holding a blooming flower. At the base of the statue, faded letters had been scratched almost smooth. Clara bent to read them, but the language was old and broken. The bracelet warmed before she touched the stone. One word flared in silver light beneath her fingers: life. Clara snatched her hand back. The conservatory seemed to inhale. All around her, unopened moonflowers trembled on their vines. Adrian went still. What did you do? Fear rose fast, familiar and bitter. Nothing. I did not mean to. I know. He said it with such certainty that the panic inside her lost its footing. She looked at him, searching for suspicion, for hunger, for the look men wore when they discovered something useful. She found none of it. Only attention, careful and grave. The court will not see it that way, she whispered. If they know I can do something, they will call it fertility magic. They will call me crown-bound. Adrian's jaw tightened. They will try. And if they are right? The question left her before she could stop it. What if I am not barren? What if this seal is hiding exactly what they want? A royal heir. A bloodline. A womb they can argue over in a prettier room than the auction hall. Her voice cracked on the last words, and she hated it. She turned away, blinking hard. Everyone keeps talking about what I might be able to give. Ethan wanted children until I could not give them. Ashford wanted shame when I could not give them heirs. Harlan wants classification. Madeline wants me gone. Even the court will only care if my body can solve a royal problem. Adrian crossed no closer, but his voice came nearer somehow, low and steady. I do not want a child from fear. Clara froze. I do not want an heir. Purchased by law, pressure, gratitude, or loneliness, he continued. If the royal line ends with me because the only way to preserve it is to make a woman into a vessel, then it deserves to end. Clara turned slowly. The words were too large, too dangerous, too unlike anything a king should admit. You cannot mean that. I am tired of rulers saying the kingdom requires cruelty and calling it sacrifice. Outside, snow brushed softly against the glass. Inside, one moonflower opened. Then another. Clara stared as pale petals unfurled along the nearest vine, silver light pooling at their centers. She had not touched them. She had only heard him refuse to make her useful at the cost of herself, and something in the room had answered. The bracelet pulsed again, not painfully, but with recognition. Adrian looked at the flowers, then back at her. Clara. His voice had changed. She followed his gaze to the wall behind Queen Seraphina's statue. Lines of silver light spread across the old stone, revealing names hidden beneath centuries of dust. Clara stepped closer, breath caught in her throat. There were dozens of them, women whose names had been scratched away from royal history. At the very bottom, newly bright, appeared her own, Clara of the silver womb line. The room tilted, but this time Adrian did move. Not to seize her, not to hold her in place. He only came close enough that if she reached out, he would be there. Clara pressed one hand to the wall, and the silver letters warmed beneath her palm. Another line appeared under her name. Not womb of heirs alone, but keeper of life force, healer of broken bonds, restorer of dying roots. Tears filled her eyes, so suddenly the words blurred. Life force. Not just fertility. Not just pregnancy. Not just the one thing everyone had used to measure whether she deserved tenderness. Something wider. Something holy. The moon flowers opened faster now, spreading along the walls in waves of pale bloom. With each flower, Clara felt a small thread inside herself loosen. Not the bracelet. Not yet, but the shame beneath it. She remembered every healer's disappointed silence. Every month she had marked with dread, every time Ethan had touched her shoulder with pity as if her grief inconvenienced him. She had mourned a body that had never been allowed to speak for itself. Adrian's hand rested against the stone near hers, not touching her. The crown mark on his signet ring glowed faintly in answer to the bracelet. Clara watched the light move between them, delicate as breath. "Is this why the word said the true crown must kneel?" she asked. Adrian's expression darkened. "Maybe the seal will only open for a king who does not claim the power inside it as his right." Clara looked at him, at the man who could command armies but was standing in a room full of blooming flowers, refusing to command her. Something fragile inside her shifted. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of belief. Then the conservatory doors opened. Dr. Elaine Mercer stood there, pale and breathless, her healer's coat dusted with snow. "Your Majesty." Clara. Her eyes moved over the awakened flowers, the glowing wall, the revealed name, and her face tightened with alarm. "The council has moved the trial forward. Lord Harlan claims the seal is active and must be contained before sunrise." Clara's fingers curled against the stone. The flowers trembled. Adrian's silver-gray eyes went cold. Elaine swallowed. "They are gathering in the moon cradle chamber now." Clara looked once more at her name on the wall. Clara of the silver womb line. For the first time, it did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a door. She turned to Adrian. Fear still beat in her chest, but beneath it something else had begun to grow, pale and stubborn as a flower opening in winter. "Then let them ask their questions," she said. "This time, I want the room to hear my answer." The moon cradle chamber was not built for mercy. Clara understood that the moment the doors opened and cold white light spilled across the corridor like judgment. The room beyond was circular, older than the palace above it, carved into pale stone veined with silver. At its center stood the moon cradle stone, a low oval altar shaped not like a bed, not like a throne, but like something made to receive secrets people were too afraid to speak aloud. Counselors filled the upper ring. Noble families watched from shadowed galleries. Ethan Caldwell stood with the Ashford elders, his face arranged in solemn regret, while Madeline Voss waited beside Lord Victor Harlan in a gown of soft ivory, looking as if she had come to mourn Clara rather than destroy her. Clara felt every stare move over her body before it reached her face. The old reflex returned, the urge to fold her arms over herself, to become smaller, to make the inspection easier to survive. Then Adrian's voice sounded beside her, low enough that only she could hear. "They are looking for a thing they can name. Do not help them forget you are a person." The words steadied her more than a hand would have. He did not touch her as they entered. That mattered. Tonight, with the court waiting to argue over her body, his restraint felt louder than any claim. Lord Harlan rose when Clara reached the center. "Clara Whitmore of Ashford registration," he announced, and the old name scraped against her skin. "You stand before the court under emergency fertility review due to evidence of concealed royal blood magic." Clara lifted her chin. "Clara Whitmore," Adrian said. The entire chamber turned toward him. His expression was calm, but the air around him sharpened. "Not of Ashford registration. Her pack status is in dispute. Her auction transfer was witnessed by the crown, and no woman in this chamber will be addressed as paperwork." A murmur passed through the gallery. Harlan's jaw tightened. "As your Majesty wishes. Clara Whitmore, you will place your hand upon the moon cradle stone. The court will determine whether you are barren, cursed, or crown-bound." Clara's stomach twisted at each word. 3 cages, each with a prettier name than the last. She looked at the stone, then at the people waiting to see which cage would close. "Before I touch it," she said, surprised by the clarity of her own voice, "I want the court to hear what is being asked." If the stone says I am barren, Ashford says I failed. If it says I am cursed, the council says I am dangerous. If it says I am powerful, Lord Harlan says I belong to the throne. Silence spread, uneasy and alive. So tell me, Clara continued, turning slowly so the chamber had to meet her eyes. Where is the answer that lets me belong to myself? No one replied. Ethan looked down first. Madeline's mouth tightened. Harlan recovered with a thin smile. Emotional speeches do not alter law. Adrian's voice cut in. No, but they expose who benefits from it. Harlan ignored him and gestured to Ethan. Lord Caldwell, state your testimony. Ethan stepped forward, holding a folded document. Clara recognized the blue seal before he opened it. The first healer report. The one she had never been allowed to keep. During our marriage, Ethan said, his voice heavy with practiced sorrow, I provided Clara with every available medical treatment. 3 senior healers confirmed permanent barrenness. I delayed annulment for her dignity, but after repeated failure, Ashford Pack had no option but to release her through lawful auction. Each sentence was a polished stone placed on her chest. Clara remembered those years differently. Waiting outside closed doors while Ethan spoke to healers without her, being told not to worry her fragile mind with details, learning results from his mother's sighs instead of her own records. Madeline stepped forward next, offering another folder to the council. Independent verification from Voss physicians, she said. The condition is irreversible. Any current magical reaction must be artificial, likely attached to the bracelet. Elaine, standing near the healer's bench, went rigid. Those reports are in signed copies. Harlan lifted a hand. They will be reviewed after the stone test. Of course they will, Elaine said coldly. After the result has already been shaped. Harlan's eyes hardened. Enough. Clara walked to the moon cradle stone before anyone else could decide the timing for her. The surface looked smooth, but when she came close, tiny symbols shifted under the silver veins like fish beneath ice. Her bracelet grew warm, then hot enough to make her breath catch. Adrian moved one step. Clara shook her head, not because she did not want help, because this answer had to enter the room through her hand. She laid her palm on the stone. Nothing happened at first. Then the chamber filled with the sound of a heartbeat. Not hers, not Adrian's. Older, slower. The silver veins brightened, traveling up the stone toward her wrist. The bracelet flashed, and the hidden script appeared for all to see. Closed until the true crown kneels. Gasps rose from the gallery. Harlan's face went pale for half a second before he hit it. Madeline stared at the words as if they had betrayed her personally. Ethan took a step back. The moon cradle stone ignored them all. More letters formed beneath Clara's hand, bright and undeniable. Her womb was never barren. Her power was locked to protect the crown from thieves. The chamber erupted. Harlan shouted for order, but the stone continued, light spilling across the floor in silver branches. Images rose above it, not clear enough to be memory yet, but sharp enough to wound. A younger Clara sleeping as a child while a woman with Clara's same eyes fastened the bracelet around her wrist and wept. A royal council seal pressed into wax. Lord Harlan's hand accepting a packet of Ashford healer reports. Madeline's family crest stamped beside the name Vossline candidate for queen succession. Clara's throat closed. She tried to pull her hand away, but the stone held only light, not force. Elaine whispered, "It is answering your name, not the test." Adrian's voice came from behind her, quiet and fierce. Clara Whitmore. The stone brightened. Harlan snapped, "Do not interfere." Adrian did not look at him. "I am not speaking to the stone." Clara closed her eyes. Her name. Not Barren. Not cursed. Not asset. Clara Whitmore. She pressed her palm flatter against the glowing surface. "Ask me," she whispered. The room fell silent around the impossible command. The moon cradle stone pulsed once, and a question appeared in silver letters. "Do you consent to the seal being witnessed?" Tears burned her eyes. Not removed. Not claimed. Witnessed. For the first time, the magic in the room had asked her before touching the locked place inside her. Clara looked at Adrian. He stood several feet away, every line of him held in restraint, his expression filled with the kind of anger that protected instead of consumed. "It is your answer," he said. Clara looked back at the stone. "Yes." The bracelet opened with a sound like a quiet breath. It did not fall away. It loosened, revealing a ring of pale skin beneath, unmarked except for a silver moon symbol glowing faintly at her pulse. The chamber lights dimmed. Above the stone, the image is sharpened into a single phrase, written across the air for every noble, elder, and counselor to read. Silver womb line preserved by maternal seal. Life force carrier. Bond healer. Not property of pack, court, crown, or mate. Clara's knees weakened, but she remained standing. Ethan looked as though the floor had vanished beneath him. Madeline's perfect mask cracked open into fear. Harlan's hand curled over the council rail, knuckles white. For years, they had argued over what Clara could not give. The stone had just told them what she was, and denied every one of them ownership. Adrian stepped forward only when Clara looked at him. "May I stand with you?" he asked in front of the court. The question broke something in her that shame never had. Clara nodded. Adrian came to her side, not ahead of her, not between her and the truth, but beside her where everyone could see the difference. The moon cradle stone flared once more, and one final line appeared beneath the others. The crown that kneels may unlock the seal, but only the woman may choose the door. The moon cradle chamber did not return to silence after the final line appeared. It sank into something deeper, something more dangerous than noise. Every person present had heard the stone deny their claim over Clara Whitmore, and for the first time since the auction, the shame in the room no longer belonged to her. It moved outward, finding the people who had built elegant laws around hunger and called them tradition. Clara stood beside Adrian Blackthorne with the loosened bracelet warm around her wrist, the pale silver moon symbol glowing against her skin. She expected relief. Instead, grief rose first, sudden and sharp. She had not been barren. She had been hidden. She had not failed Ethan. She had been sealed before any man had ever looked at her and decided what she was worth. 3 years of marriage, countless healer visits. Every quiet apology she had offered for a body that had only been protecting a truth someone else feared. All of it came rushing back until her breath caught. Adrian must have heard it. He did not touch her. He only angled his body slightly closer, a silent wall against the stairs. Lord Harlan recovered first because men like him mistook speed for innocence. "This proves nothing beyond the presence of ancient magic," he said, his voice cutting across the chamber. "A sealed bloodline is not automatically lawful." The silver womb line was removed from succession records for cause. Dr. Elaine Mercer stepped forward, face pale but eyes bright with fury. "It was removed by your signature." Harlan's expression hardened. "Mind your place, doctor." Elaine lifted the unsigned healer reports Madeline had provided earlier. "I did. For years. That is why I recognize falsified medical language when I see it. These reports were not written by Ashford healers. They were copied from royal confinement records used on rare Omega bloodlines before the practice was banned." A ripple passed through the court. Madeline's fingers tightened around the edge of her ivory sleeve. Ethan looked at Harlan too quickly. Clara saw it. So did Adrian. "Ask the stone," Clara said. Her own voice startled her. It was not loud, but it carried. Harlan turned toward her with cold contempt. "The stone is not a courtroom servant for your curiosity." Clara looked down at the moon cradle stone, still glowing beneath her hand. "No, it is worse for you than that. It does not flatter powerful men." A few counselors shifted. Adrian's mouth did not smile, but something in his eyes warmed. Clara placed her palm flat against the stone again. "You asked me if I consented to the seal being witnessed. I consent to the truth behind it being witnessed too." The chamber lights dimmed. The moon cradle stone pulsed, and the air above it silvered into memory. This time the image was clear. Clara saw a woman with her same eyes standing in a nursery washed in moonlight, younger than Clara had imagined and frightened in a way that made her chest ache. Her mother, not a portrait, not a rumor, a living memory, holding a baby, with a silver bracelet open in her shaking hands. Beside her stood a younger Elaine, tears on her cheeks, and behind them, hidden in the half-open doorway, Lord Harlan's voice spoke from the corridor. "If the child carries the silver womb gift, she belongs to the succession plan. The crown needs a controllable womb, not another unruly Luna healer." Clara felt the entire chamber inhale. The memory shifted. Her mother pressed the bracelet to the baby's wrist, whispering through tears. "Then let them think she is empty. Let them pass her over. Let them laugh if it keeps her breathing free." The bracelet closed with a soft glow. Not a curse. A shield. Clara's eyes burned, but she did not look away. The memory changed again. Ethan appeared years later in Ashford Pack House, younger and eager, sitting across from Harlan. "Marry her," Harlan said, sliding a sealed packet across the desk. "Watch the bracelet. If it opens, inform me. If it does not, discard her quietly. A Barren Omega will not attract royal attention." Ethan's face drained of color in the present. In the memory, he nodded. Clara's fingers went numb. She had expected cowardice. She had not expected calculation from the very beginning. 3 years of her life had not been a failed marriage. It had been surveillance dressed as patience. The memory shifted once more to Madeline Voss, standing in a mirrored chamber with Harlan and her father. "Once Adrian accepts me," Madeline said, her voice smooth and bright, "the court will have a queen they can guide. No hidden Omega will matter." Harlan answered, "The auction will flush out any sealed bloodlines eventually. It always does." The image vanished. No one spoke. Even the moonlight seemed still. Clara turned slowly toward Ethan. The man who had once held her hand in public so gently now looked like someone watching a mask dissolve. "You knew," she said. Ethan shook his head, but the movement was weak. Not everything. The bracelet pulsed. The moon cradle stone glowed beneath his feet, though he stood yards away. Silver letters formed in the air above him. He knew enough. Clara closed her eyes for one breath. When she opened them, the ache was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer asking to be loved by him. It was asking to be released. Madeline laughed once, soft and brittle. "This is sentimental theater. Even if Harlan investigated bloodlines, that does not make Clara fit for the throne." She was still sold, still discarded, still a woman no pack wanted until magic made her convenient. Adrian moved then, but Clara lifted her hand. He stopped instantly. The entire court saw it. Not because she controlled him, but because he respected her signal. Clara faced Madeline. "You are right about one thing. They did not want me." Her voice did not tremble now. "That is not my shame anymore." The moon cradle stone brightened, and for the first time Clara felt the power beneath the words silver womb line. It was not only fertility. It was root and breath, bond and bloom, the quiet force that told broken things they were allowed to live again. The moonflowers carved into the chamber walls opened from stone, silver petals unfolding where no living plant should grow. Wolves in the gallery lowered their heads without meaning to. Harlan saw the shift and panicked behind his polished face. "Enough." Under emergency succession law, Clara Whitmore is hereby designated a royal biological asset pending containment. The words had barely left his mouth before the entire chamber went cold. Adrian stepped forward, silver-gray eyes bright with a storm held behind discipline. But again, he did not reach for Clara. He spoke to the court. "You have heard the stone. You have seen the memories. You have heard Lord Harlan name a free woman as an asset. Any counselor who stands with that word may rise now and be recorded beside him." No one rose. Harlan looked around, discovering too late that power often vanished the moment witnesses stopped pretending not to see it. Madeline stepped back from him first. Ethan followed with his eyes lowered. Cowards, Clara thought, but the word no longer hurt. Harlan's mouth twisted. The king is compromised by her influence. Adrian's reply was quiet. "No, I am finally free of yours." Clara turned to the moon cradle stone. "What happens now?" she asked, not to Adrian, not to Harlan, but to the old magic that had asked her consent when the court would not. Silver words appeared, slow and clear. "The seal may open fully when the crown kneels, but the door belongs to Clara Whitmore." Harlan's face went ashen. The condition was not about making a king claim her. It was about proving a king would humble himself before her choice. Clara looked at Adrian. Understanding passed between them, terrifying and tender. Before he could move, Harlan gave one final order to the guards at the doors. "Separate her from him." No one obeyed. Adrian did not smile. He simply removed the royal signet from his hand, placed it on the edge of the moon cradle stone, and stepped down from the dais until he stood before Clara, not above her. Then the King Alpha lowered to one knee in front of the entire court. Gasps swept through the chamber like wind through glass. Clara's bracelet opened another fraction, silver light spilling from the seam. Adrian lifted his eyes to hers. "Not to unlock you for the throne," he said. "Not to claim what your blood can give. I kneel because the law, the council, and every man who measured you forgot to ask what you choose." Clara's breath broke softly. Behind her ribs, something long-sealed stirred like spring beneath snow. Harlan's last command hung useless in the air, and Clara understood the truth at last. She had not survived because she was empty. She had survived because her mother had hidden a queen where no one greedy would think to look. Adrian Blackthorne stayed on one knee before Clara Whitmore, and the whole Moon Cradle chamber seemed to forget how to breathe. Kings did not kneel. King Alphas were not raised to lower themselves before anyone. Least of all in Omega, the court had watched being sold less than 24 hours earlier. Yet there he was, pale blonde, head bowed only enough to honor her without hiding his face, silver gray, eyes lifted to hers, one hand resting open on the glowing stone, empty of command. Clara looked at him and felt the old world struggle to survive around them. Lord Harlan stood rigid with disbelief. Madeline Voss looked as if someone had taken the crown she had already imagined on her own head and placed it somewhere she could never reach. Ethan Caldwell stared at Clara not with love, not even regret, but with the terrified realization that the woman he had discarded had become the center of a law older than his ambition. The loosened bracelet on Clara's wrist glowed brighter, its silver seam opening a hair wider, but it did not fall away. The magic waited. For her. Not for Adrian. Not for the court. Clara stepped closer to the Moon Cradle stone, her heartbeat steadying with each breath. "You all wanted to know what I was," she said, turning so the chamber had no choice but to look at her. "Barren. Cursed. Crownbound. Asset. Wife. Failure. Property." Every name came from someone who wanted something from me, or wanted to explain why I was worth nothing. The stone pulsed beneath her words. The old auction papers Harlan had brought as proof lifted from the council table and unfolded in midair, silver light tracing each signature. Ethan Caldwell. Ashford Elders. Victor Harlan. A broker seal from the Royal Mating Auction. Clara looked at Ethan. "You sold me to erase a debt." He swallowed, his face pale. "I was under pressure." The stone flashed. A line of truth appeared beneath his name. He chose status over mate bond. The chamber murmured. Clara felt the words strike, but not wound. They did not tell her anything her heart had not already learned. "You told them our marriage failed because I could not give you children." Ethan's eyes flickered to the galleries, desperate for sympathy. That was what every healer said. Elaine Mercer stepped forward with the copied reports in her hands. He never allowed Clara to receive the originals. Ashford Pack forwarded all medical findings through Lord Harlan's office. 3 reports were altered. 2 were never delivered. One stated clearly that her condition was externally suppressed. Ethan closed his eyes. The Moon Cradle stone answered again. He knew the reports were incomplete. Clara's fingers curled, then relaxed. The anger came, clean and bright, but it did not consume her. It only stood beside her, proof that she had finally stopped apologizing for being wronged. She turned to Madeline. "And you wanted me gone because my existence threatened your place beside the throne." Madeline lifted her chin, clinging to pride like it was still currency. "I wanted stability. The kingdom needs a queen who understands court law." The stone glowed beneath the Voss family crest, and a memory rose above it. Madeline in a mirrored chamber, practicing a royal vow while her father told her the silver womb line must never surface. Her own voice answered from the memory, calm and clear. "Then make sure the auction buries her before the king sees her." The memory faded. No one defended her. Madeline's composure cracked at the edges. Clara looked finally at Harlan. He had stopped pretending to be calm. "You built the auction to hunt rare Omega bloodlines," she said. Harlan's mouth tightened. "I preserved the kingdom's future." Adrian's voice, still low from where he knelt, cut through the chamber. "You preserved your control over it." Harlan looked around, but every counselor avoided his gaze. Clara touched the bracelet. "The crown paid for me because your law put me on a platform. So let the court hear this clearly. The crown did not buy me. It exposed the debt." The Moon Cradle stone blazed. The royal crown Adrian had left at the auction was carried in by a guard, placed on a velvet cushion before the court. Its silver points were dim now, less like treasure than evidence. Adrian rose only after Clara looked at him, and even then he did not step ahead of her. He lifted the crown from the cushion and walked to where Clara stood. For one breath, the court expected him to place it on her head. Instead, he lowered it to the floor at her feet. A shock moved through the room. Adrian's voice carried to every corner. This crown never bought her. It paid the debt this kingdom owed her. Clara stared at the crown on the stone. The same symbol that had once been used to remove her from an auction now rested below her, not above her, not claiming her, not defining her. Something inside her opened with a quiet force. The bracelet unlocked completely and fell into her palm, light as a shed chain. Beneath it, a silver mark circled her wrist like moonlight turned into skin. The moon cradle stone answered in letters. No one could deny. Clara Whitmore of the Silver Womb line. Life force carrier. Bond healer. Free woman. The word free struck the chamber harder than Queen could have. Clara closed her fingers around the old bracelet and faced the council. I will not wear this as proof that I can give the throne an heir, she said. I will keep it as proof that no one here gets to decide my worth by what my body can provide. One by one, the lower court bowed. Not all from love. Some from fear, some from shame, some because the old magic left them no room for denial. But they bowed. Ethan sank first among the Ashford delegation, the pack crest on his coat fading from silver to dull gray as the mate bond records dissolved under moon law. Madeline bowed only when her knees gave way beneath the weight of the stone's judgment, her claim to queen candidacy burning from the succession list above the council rail. Harlan remained standing until Adrian turned to the guards and said, Record Lord Victor Harlan's confession, the stone's memory, and his unlawful classification of a free Omega as crown property. His council seat is revoked pending full trial. The guards stepped forward, not with violence, but with royal authority. Harlan looked at Clara then, hatred stripped bare. You think he will not want what you carry? Clara looked at Adrian. The question was cruel because it still knew where fear lived in her. Adrian answered by stepping back, creating visible space between them. What she carries is hers. Her power. Her future. Her answer. Clara's throat tightened. The room blurred for 1 second, not from weakness, but from the unfamiliar weight of being defended without being possessed. Adrian turned to her in front of everyone, the crown still at her feet, the court still bowed, the old bracelet resting in her hand. Clara, he said, and her name sounded like a vow before any vow was made. I will not claim you because the stone recognized you. I will not claim you because the kingdom needs a Luna. I will not claim you because I paid the price that freed you from that hall. I am asking as a man, not commanding as a king. Do you choose me? The chamber held utterly still. Clara thought of the auction platform, of Ethan's averted eyes, of healers who spoke around her, of the word Barren cutting deeper each time it was spoken politely. Then she thought of a door in herself opening not because someone forced it, but because someone finally waited outside it and knocked. She stepped over the crown, leaving it behind her, and placed her hand in Adrian's open palm. I choose you, she said, but not because you bought my freedom. His fingers closed gently around hers. Then why? Clara looked at the kneeling court, at the men and women who had watched her be priced, judged, sealed, and named. Her voice did not shake. Because you gave it back. The moon cradle stone flared, and the silver mark at her wrist bloomed upward in lines of light, not chains, but vines, wrapping around her hand and his where they touched. The mate bond formed like warmth after winter, quiet, voluntary, and strong enough to make every wolf in the chamber bow its head. Adrian lowered his forehead to her hand, not as a conqueror, but as the true crown kneeling at last. Behind them, the moonflowers carved into the stone walls opened in a wave of silver petals, and the old auction crown at Clara's feet cracked down the center, releasing a burst of white light that erased the final seal from her skin. The white light from the broken auction crown faded slowly, leaving the moon cradle chamber washed in a quiet silver glow. Clara Whitmore stood with her hand in Adrian Blackthorn's, the final traces of the seal gone from her skin, the old bracelet resting open in her palm like a chain that had forgotten how to close. Around them, nobles, elders, guards, and counselors remained bowed, not because the King Alpha had ordered it, but because the moon cradle stone had recognized what the auction hall refused to see. Clara's chest rose and fell with careful breaths. She had expected triumph to feel loud. Instead, it felt almost unbearable in its stillness, as if her soul had stepped out of a locked room and did not yet know how much sky existed. Then the oath stone at the far wall awakened. its dark surface filled with silver veins, and the broken crown at Clara's feet turned to dust, revealing a narrow scroll hidden inside the royal medal. Elaine Mercer crossed the chamber and lifted it with trembling hands. "The first crown was made to protect the silver womb line," she whispered, "not to own it." The scroll unrolled by itself above the oath stone, showing the original royal pact in moonlit script. The silver womb line had never been created to produce heirs on command. It was a Luna healer bloodline, born to restore dying bonds, revive fading pack lands, and carry royal children only by willing mate bond. The so-called fertility curse had been a lie. The true curse was the seal placed around Clara to hide her from men who would have turned her gift into a throne machine. Blood memory rose next, not as a speech, but as living proof. Clara saw her mother, pale and brave, placing the bracelet on a sleeping child while whispering that one day a true crown would kneel, not to unlock a womb, but to prove the world had become safe enough for her daughter to choose. She saw Harlan signing the secret treaty with Ashford and Voss, saw Ethan accepting the incomplete healer reports, saw Madeline's family funding the auction registry to track rare Omega bloodlines. Each clue found its answer in the light. The warm bracelet had been a maternal seal. The false healer reports had been edited through Harlan's office. Ethan's marriage had begun as surveillance and ended as debt payment. Madeline's sympathy had been ambition wearing silk. Harlan's law had never protected the kingdom. It protected his control over the throne. The oath stone darkened, and Adrian turned to the court. His voice was calm, which made it more final than anger. "Lord Victor Harlan is removed from the royal council, stripped of succession authority, and placed under public trial for bloodline trafficking, falsified registry law, and unlawful classification of free Omegas as crown property." The guards took Harlan's council chain from his shoulders. No one moved to defend him. Madeline Voss was next. The moon cradle stone erased her name from the queen candidacy list in a line of silver fire that left no smoke, only absence. Her family holdings tied to the auction registry were seized for restoration of the women sold under false law. Ethan Caldwell stood last, face gray beneath the eyes. The Ashford crest on his coat lost its shine as the stone revoked his alpha claim for selling his mate, concealing medical truth, and trading marriage for political debt. He looked at Clara, and for the first time, there was no polished regret left in him. Only the knowledge that he had thrown away a woman and exposed himself as the one without worth. Clara did not smile. She did not need to. The court doors opened at Adrian's command, and the gathered packs outside were allowed to witness the judgment. Word had spread through the palace and beyond. Those who had sat in the auction hall now filled the courtyard, wrapped in winter coats beneath the full moon. Clara walked out first, still in her pale gown, her wrist glowing with the silver mark of the silver womb line. Adrian walked beside her, not ahead. The auctioneer who had called her Barren bowed, so deeply his forehead nearly touched the stone. The alphas who had refused to bid lowered their eyes. Ashford elders knelt. Women who had whispered that Clara was defective now stared at the living moonflowers blooming along the courtyard walls where her presence passed. Elaine read the restored record aloud before them all. Clara Whitmore, free Omega, daughter of the hidden silver womb line, life force carrier, bond healer, Luna by blood, woman by choice, property of no pack, no court, no crown, no mate. The word Barren was not erased from memory. It was defeated in public. Then Adrian stepped away from her, so everyone could see there was no command between them. He removed the royal claiming ring from his hand and placed it on his open palm. "Clara," he said, his voice carrying across the snow, "the court has recognized you. The oath stone has cleared your mother, and your enemies have answered. None of that gives me the right to claim you. If you walk away from this palace tonight, the road will be guarded in your name. If you stay, it must be because your heart chooses to." Clara looked at the ring, then at the crowd that had once watched her be priced like a flawed object. Her body no longer felt like evidence. Her future no longer felt like a debt. She stepped closer because she wanted to, not because law, gratitude, fear, or loneliness pushed her there. "I choose you," she said. "Not because I need a king to make me worthy. Because you remembered to ask." Adrian's control broke only in his eyes. He slid the ring onto her finger, then bowed his head over their joined hands. The mate bond opened between them like moonlight crossing water, warm, voluntary, and steady. No chains, no ownership. A vow. The silver mark at Clara's wrist bloomed into a Luna mark at her throat, and every moonflower in the courtyard opened at once. Months later, the royal mating auction hall no longer existed as it had been. The platforms were removed. The registry was burned before witnesses. In its place stood the Silver Conservatory, a sanctuary where Omegas could seek legal protection, healing, and pact choice without being measured by fertility. Harlan's trial ended with exile from power and restoration of every stolen estate. Madeline lost her court title and returned the Voss fortune taken from sealed bloodlines. Ethan lived without his alpha rank, required to stand before Ashford Pack and publicly retract every lie he had used to shame Clara. The law changed first in ink, then in custom, then in the way mothers held their daughters without fear of what a council might call them. Clara became Luna Queen not because she could carry heirs, but because she carried life back into a kingdom that had mistaken control for survival. On the first night of spring, she stood with Adrian in the old auction hall turned garden, snow melting beyond the glass roof, moonflowers glowing around the place where her platform had once stood. The repaired crown rested on a stone table between them. Clara did not wear it yet. She placed her hand over it and felt no chain, no seal, no shame. Adrian stood beside her, quiet and steady, his wolf peaceful under her touch. Outside, wolves howled across the northern hills, not in command, but in recognition. Clara looked at the moonlit room where she had once been unwanted and finally understood the truth her mother had hidden inside the seal. She had never been empty. She had been waiting for a world worthy of her freedom.